Good evening and welcome to the City of Topeka Planning Commission meeting. We are a commission appointed by the mayor and city council to plan for the orderly growth and development of the community, to hold public hearings and to make recommendations to the city council on planning items. Please note that the city council rules state that the public hearings for planning cases shall be conducted solely by the planning commission. No additional public hearings will be conducted by the city council. Tonight's cases are tentatively scheduled to be heard by the City Council next month. Agendas can be found at topeka.org. For the cases that require public hearings, the procedure will be as follows. First, the Planning Department staff will summarize the case. Next, we will hear from the applicant or their representative. Then we will receive public testimony. Public comment should be addressed solely to the chair and are limited to 4 minutes. Chris, please take the roll.
Mr. Armstrong,
Here.
Mr. Dean,
Here.
Mr. Freed is not able to be here this evening. Mr. Knar,
Here.
Mr. Kalp,
Here.
Ms. Lawson,
Here.
Ms. Messina,
Here.
Ms. Ringler,
Here.
and Mr. Warner is not able to be here this evening, but we have 7 and a quorum.
Thank you. Item B, approval of minutes, November 16th, 2020.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I move approval of the minutes as submitted by staff.
Messina will second.
Motion is second. Any discussion? Chris, please take the roll.
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Knar,
Aye.
Mr. Kalp,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
All right, item C, declaration of conflict of interest, ex parte communications by members of the commission or staff. I will start this section with, I was contacted by Mr. Hutton with the attorneys representing CU 20-03, the Kansas Sand and Concrete case, about my firm conducting the traffic study. As a part of that case, I told him that would be before the commission, and I sent that on to another engineering firm in town that does that type of work. So that's all I have to close. Anyone else? All right, we'll move on to item D, action items. CPA 20/01 by the City of Topeka, a request to amend the text and map of the City of Topeka's comprehensive plan, creating the East Topeka North Neighborhood Plan. The area affected by the amendment is bounded by the BNSF railways to the north and west, Deer Creek Trail to the east, and Southeast 6th Avenue to the south. Mr. Risley.
Mr. Chairman, I'll introduce, this is Dan Warner. I'll introduce Bryson, just say a couple things first. You received an update last month. You got a full introduction to the planning process. So this month, Mr. Risley will primarily update you on the implementation for this neighborhood plan. So go ahead and take it away, Bryson.
Thank you, Dan. And thank you for everyone for letting me share this with you tonight. Let me get my screen shared here. Can everyone, is this showing up for everybody?
Yeah, it's in presentation mode. I can see the next slide, but looks good.
Okay. So it is showing you the next slide presentation portion of it?
Yes.
All right. Let me see if I can get that. We good there?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. All right. So as stated, this is CPA 20-01, the East Topeka North Neighborhood Plan. This is a new neighborhood plan or an update to the 2002 East Topeka Revitalization Plan. So again, thank you all for being here. This has been a long time that we've been working on this. So this is kind of the context. So what is SORT? SORT is a 3-year process that provides targeted infrastructure and housing improvements. It's broken down into a couple of different phases, with year 1 being the planning process. During that first year, we assess the current conditions of the neighborhood. We really look at housing, infrastructure, crime, and owner occupancy. We go through the segments of what make up a neighborhood plan, work with the SORT planning committee to provide an update. And then we work on that implementation section, which is really identifying infrastructure projects within the target areas that can be done. Year 2 is project design, and year 3 is typically implementation. So again, we're looking at 1.7 million for infrastructure and 330,000 for through housing and urban development, or HUD. What we're doing here, and we've talked to the neighborhood, is we would like to use some of those SORT funds for a match to provide additional money and projects to the neighborhood. So we'll have a minimum of 9 projects with potential for more than 12. So process and background. In 2019, the East Topeka North NIA applied for and was awarded the 2020 SORT, so Stages of Resource Targeting. We held our kickoff meeting in February and have held almost monthly. There kind of in the summer, we did not meet quite as much as we tried to get public engagement higher, but we met digitally to try and get as much public engagement. And then December 9th and 10th, we held 2 separate meetings, one in English and one in Spanish, to talk to the neighborhood and let them know what we worked with the NIA to develop this neighborhood plan. And here we are now. So as previously stated, the planning area for the neighborhood is the BNSF rail lines to the west and the north, Deer Creek Trail to the east, and then Southeast 6th Avenue. And downtown Topeka is just to the west of this neighborhood. So 2020 plan highlights. I think an overall highlight for this was the use of surveys, whether it was physical surveys of prepaid postage or digital surveys or the ArcGIS story maps to supplement that public engagement portion. We had over 80 individual responses in both English and Spanish to help provide us some context for the neighborhood. Within the plan, we have a continued push for home ownership and investment in single-family housing. We have seen since 2000, owner occupancy has gone up by about 9%, but we'd like to continue to see that trend upward in the neighborhood. Encourage the redevelopment of the Eastboro Shopping Center. You have these smaller commercial businesses or mom and pop shops that are popping up along 6th Avenue. And it'd be really awesome to see the Eastboro Shopping Center act as an anchor for this kind of the neighborhood, but then the greater area. Provide a grocery store or a pharmacy, something that can really act as an amenity for the neighborhood. Increase the quantity of mixed use. We have 2 areas that we are increasing the mixed use in the neighborhood. One is along Branner Traffic Way, and the other is to the east of Ripley Park. Those areas both already have a mix of residential uses along with light industrial. The intent is that by having them be mixed use, we can improve the single-family homes in that area and not allow industrial uses to continue to encroach within the neighborhood. Investment in target areas. So our 2 target areas, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we come along in the presentation. But Scott Magnet Dual Language Elementary and Southeast Teft Street were the 2 areas we heard the most about. So Teft really connects to 6th Avenue, and Scott Magnet has some infrastructure needs around that area. We built our target areas around those 2 streets and areas and tried to increase or implement projects that will address pavement as well as sidewalks, curb and gutter. And again, the final thing is the ability to leverage those SORT funds to provide more money and projects to the neighborhood. So target areas. This is our composite map for the neighborhood. So the composite map is taking a housing map, an infrastructure map, our crime map, and owner occupancy, overlaying them on each other to generate one comprehensive map for the neighborhood. We then identify the strengths and anchors. Strengths are the blocks that have relatively good scores or have opportunity to change quickly. And then anchors, which are kind of your long-standing known places within the community where there's already been some investment or potential for more investment. From there, we map the target areas. So we can see here we have 1 and 2. 1 is the central target area. It was voted as the primary target area by the neighborhood on our meetings on December 9th and 10th. And then 2, which is the eastern target area, is our secondary target area. We kind of form these around what we heard throughout our public engagement process, as well as working with some of the other boundaries that like the floodplain and the rail lines to develop something where we could really implement the most housing dollars within the neighborhood. So getting into that implementation section, we're going to see 3 slides here that really go over what projects we are talking about and what we're really looking at. This is what we're calling the primary or priority projects. There are 8 of them here. As you can see, 1 through 6 fall within that primary target area, and projects 7 and 8 are on Teff Street. The 2 that take up the most money are New Roadway and New Roadway Plus within this area. That's really addressing the pavement around the school. That was something we heard a lot about. That New Roadway Plus includes some curb and gutter work as well, and 5th Street's really in need of that. So we've outlined these 8 projects. That comes to a total of just under, right over 1.1 million. Our request to the neighborhood on December 9th and 10th was to allow us to use those remaining funds, so just over 565,000, to be used as match funds for projects we wish to pursue in the future. We believe that we can leverage these funds to get projects 9 through 12 and maybe even more done. Working along with that thought process, as you see the asterisks by projects 7 and 8, we intend to install curb and gutter and sidewalks on the east side of Teft, with the intent that a half-cent sales tax match can be used to get the new roadway installed in that area. So these are the projects the neighborhood voted for approval of. We'll right now move to the next set of projects. These are those match or leverage projects we were talking about. So when we look at these are kind of in an order that we believe they should be pursued based upon feedback from the neighborhood. So project number 9 is that half-cent sales tax project we would like to see done within the neighborhood. Project 10 is a sidewalk connection project. There was a lot of concern that there isn't sidewalk from Golden up to 3rd by that Teft area over by Woodland. So the installation of a connection project. So kids are getting safely to and from Scott Magnet who live in the neighborhood. And then some other sidewalk connection projects along Woodland and Alkire, increasing the connectivity to 6th Avenue. Project number 13 is a water line project, which coincides with the new roadway plus. So the intent there is that while we're doing the new roadway, we can have that water line installed and not have to tear up the pavement in the future. The hope here is that we can generate about another $500,000 that would go into this neighborhood. So the total leverage of 1 million, knowing we have 565,000 there. So we're talking 450,000 plus that we can produce for the neighborhood. Then we kind of have our tertiary projects or other projects. There is some potential that if all of the grants come in, there is still some funds that remain. So we've identified additional projects throughout the neighborhood that we could potentially come back and say, hey, we have more funding, please help us select some projects. Or this can be used to help guide project selection in the future for the neighborhood. As far as funding, we have the 2 known commodities, which are the SORT infrastructure with 1.7, with the design and implementation beginning in 2021. The SORT housing also beginning in 2021, where we'll begin identifying homes that are eligible. And then the 3 you see there with the asterisks, the citywide half-cent sales tax, the Safe Routes to School grant, and then the KDOT AIC grant. Those are all the 3 funding sources we are looking to pursue in 2021 or 2022. And our recommendation is staff recommends the approval of the East Topeka North Neighborhood Plan as an element of the city's comprehensive plan. The plan is available online at this URL. The intent is to go to City Council for review in January of 2021, and then 2021, 2022, project design and implementation. And that is all I have. If there's questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kopp.
Bryson, thank you for your presentation. And I think the plan looks really good. My question for you or for Dan is how are these projects integrated, or how do they come into the capital improvement plan for the city? Or do they?
Bryson, I'll try to answer that. Commissioner Kaup, the 1.7 million of SORT infrastructure money is programmed in the CIP every year currently. So that funding is built into the CIP on an annual basis. The housing money is an allocation from our housing funds that the city gets. We get that annually. It doesn't necessarily add up to the same number every year, but so these are annual programmed funds that we're using for the SORT neighborhoods currently.
Okay, Dan, thank you. But does that mean that if the city council adopts this area plan, that there should be some expectation that the improvement projects will happen?
Absolutely. If the city adopts this, they are adopting that list of projects, and they're prioritized in a way that if funding changes, but if projects come in under budget or over budget, then we can kind of adjust on the fly and take that back to the neighborhood. So yeah, we're good to go once council approves that. Engineering will take that project list and get started.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Bryson this evening? With that, I would entertain a motion. I believe there was one on the previous slide to accept the neighborhood plan.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I thought I saw one at some place in the agenda. Is this scheduled for public hearing, or is this just planning commission action?
No, there hasn't been a public hearing on this, has there?
That's a good question.
Right, we need a public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I thought that was last month. All right. So questions for staff. We will move on to the public hearing portion of this. So we will ask for public comments. Each speaker must come to the podium, none tonight, but state your name and you will have 4 minutes to address the commission. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this item this evening? Last call, anyone from the public wishing to speak on this neighborhood plan this evening? All right, very good. We will close the public hearing. No further comments will be received. Commission members, we can again discuss the proposal if there are any additional comments from anyone. Hearing none, I would then accept a motion on the agenda item.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll make a motion. I recommend to approve to the governing body this plan as an element of the city's comprehensive plan.
I'll second the motion.
Motion by Messina, second by Commissioner Lawson. Any further comments or discussion? All right, Chris, please take the roll.
I'm going to go backwards. So Ms. Ringler,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Mr. Kalp,
Aye.
Mr. Kennard,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
and Mr. Armstrong.
Aye.
All right, motion passes 7-0 with none abstaining.
Thank you. Move on to item D2, Z20/05 by Topeka North American Legion Post 400, requesting to amend the district zoning map on property located at 3029 Northwest US 24 Highway from M2 multiple family dwelling district to I1 light industrial district. Ms. Driver? Can't hear you, Ms. Driver, if you are speaking.
Okay, I was gonna share my screen, so let me share that again. Okay, can everybody see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a rezoning case, Z2005. The applicant is the Topeka North Legion Post 400. They requested a zoning change from M2 multiple family dwelling district to the I1 light industrial district. The property is located along the south side of Northwest Highway 24, specifically addressed as 3029 Northwest Highway 24. Contains approximately 2.7 acres. The future use of the property is not determined at this time. Uses would be permitted as allowed in the I1 zoning. The properties remain zoned multiple family since it was rezoned to the multiple family dwelling district in 1975. That zoning change in 1975 allowed the use of the building as a fraternal hall and meeting space by the American Legion. That is how it's been used since that time. It's been added on to with an expansion in 1996. This owner is trying to market the property and land because of declining interest and membership in their organization. Going to the next slide, this slide represents the zoning in the area. As you can see on the north side of Highway 24, the zoning is predominantly I2 heavy industrial district. In fact, directly to the northwest of this site, a site was recently annexed for an industrial development. The properties along the south side of Highway 24 are I1 light industrial zoning. The property immediately to the west of this property was also zoned I1 from the R1 zoning in the past year or so. The remaining properties along the frontage road are zoned either I1 or heavy commercial. The undeveloped land south of this is still zoned R1 single family dwelling district. It is identified as industrial on the future land use map. Going on to the next slide, staff evaluated this request subject to the golden criteria and the municipal code. Two factors come into play. The character of the neighborhood is much of the neighborhood along the frontage road of Highway 24 contains a mix of light industry and heavy commercial uses. The land use and growth management plan designates this property for commercial uses, specifically those that are more considered highway commercial uses, such as truck and trailer dealerships, tractor and farm supply, light warehousing. The plan indicates that light industrial zoning is appropriate within this area considered heavy commercial. Staff is recommending approval of the reclassification from the M2 multiple family dwelling district to I1 light industrial district. The applicant's representative is on the Zoom meeting to take any questions you have, and staff is open for questions you have. This concludes my presentation.
Questions for Ms. Driver, Commission? Mr. Holland, are you representing the applicant this evening? Any presentation or discussion items from your end?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I'm here to answer any questions, and I think Ms. Driver said it well. Basically trying to put this property on the market and make it, to be able to market it, it pretty much has to look like its neighbors, which are all in that same I1 zoning classification. So we're trying to go in that direction so that they can put it on market, sell it, and build a different building in a more specific area that would be better for what they're trying to offer.
Commission, any questions for Mr. Holland or Ms. Driver? All right, with that, we would open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak on this agenda item, please let us know. You'll have 4 minutes to address the commission. Anyone with us this evening to talk to this item? All right, hearing now, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, any further discussion? If not, I would entertain a motion on the item.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Kopp.
as this appears to be a very logical change in the land use designation, I would move that we recommend approval to the governing body of the rezoning from M2 to I1.
I maybe heard a second, but it might be my internet connection. Was there a second?
It was me.
I believe that was Mr. Dean.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now. I heard part of that. So we have a motion by Mr. Kopp, second by Mr. Dean. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. Chris, would you please take the roll?
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Kanar,
Aye.
Mr. Kelp,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
Ms. Ringler.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 7-0 with not abstaining.
Thank you, Chris. Move on to item D3, CU 20/03 by Kansas Sand and Concrete, Inc., requesting a conditional use permit on property presently zoned I2 Heavy Industrial District and along the east side of Northwest Stena Court near the intersection of Northwest 25th Street and Northwest Stena Court in order to allow for manufacturing, processing, type 2 concrete mixing plant. Ms. Driver.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you indicated, this is a conditional use permit for manufacturing and processing type 3. I do want to clarify, and for the record, there is a typo in the staff report that is identified as type 2. This is a type 3 use, and that is how it's been advertised and referred to. A concrete mixing plant is classified a type 3 manufacturing use in the zoning code. So this is a conditional use permit for manufacturing and processing type 3 to allow a concrete mixing plant on property that's located along the east side of Northwest Stena Court at its intersection with Northwest 25th Street. Property comprises approximately 10.2 acres. More generally, it's located north of Highway 24 and east of Highway 75. This property owner is proposing to construct a 27,500 square foot concrete mixing plant, offices, and associated shop. There will be some outside storage that's limited to offloading of crushed rock, sand, and cement on the northern end of the property. There's also a washout pit on the northeast side of the property where cement trucks will wash out residual concrete from their drums. The applicants indicated no extraction of sand will occur on the property. Sand and aggregate will be brought to the site as indicated in the traffic impact analysis. The applicant has provided a more detailed statement of operation that further addresses all the operating characteristics of the use. The subject property was annexed into the city and platted in 2010 for industrial development as part of ADR Industrial Park sub north of Northwest 25th and east of Highway 75 has been zoned heavy industry since at least 1968 when it was zoned by Shawnee County. It is on the extreme northern edge of the city limit, which is actually the property's boundary line. Going to the next slide, this depicts the zoning of the area, which is predominantly I2 heavy industrial zoning. Manufacturing and processing type 3 requires a conditional use permit in I2 zoning. The I2 zonings existed since 1968 on this site. There are some guidelines for the evaluation of conditional use permits in the code. They relate to how the property will develop compatibly with surrounding area and surrounding properties. In this circumstance, they address items such as operational characteristics, landscaping and screening, building setbacks, fencing, traffic capacity, public infrastructure, dust and noise control measures they're doing. The applicant also, at the request of the city traffic engineer, submitted a traffic impact analysis. Ultimately, that TIA concluded there would be no change to the existing level of service A at the intersections that were studied of Northwest Stouffer in 25th and Northwest Stena in 25th. The scope of the TIA studied those intersections as that was determined where the predominant traffic would come from Highway 24 via Stouffer Road. The TIA did result in the need for the applicant to conduct a pavement analysis to determine additional significant deterioration on adjacent streets from trucks traveling to and from the site. Northwest Stena was constructed in 2010 to city design specifications for designated local streets. Northwest 25th Street likely was constructed in unincorporated Shawnee County to county design specifications in effect at the time, which are not known. The pavement analysis ultimately concluded that the life of those segments of roadway may be shortened by 30% due to anticipated loading from this use. Because of this, on page 6, the city engineering did make a recommendation how those roadways could be prolonged, and specifically indicates that a 2-inch overlay on Stena and then a 1-inch mill, 3-inch overlay on Northwest 25th Street is suggested. However, that was in response to the applicant not providing another proposal for how they would attempt to mitigate against that impact. The city engineer will review an equivalent proposal with the goal of prolonging the life of the street if that is proposed by the applicant. This proposal was evaluated per the golden criteria, the conformance of the proposed use to the comprehensive plan. This property lies in an area designated employment tier for industrial uses. The land use and growth management plan establishes policies for the development of industrial uses in those employment tiers. One of those policies is the extension of urban infrastructure may be necessary. Another criteria is the extent to which the proposed use would adversely affect the capacity of the road network. As indicated by the traffic impact analysis, in relative to traffic volume, the study indicated there will be no adverse impacts on the capacity and traffic operations of those intersections that were studied. The concern of the city is the impact of the loads upon the road network rather than the volume on streets that were not designed to handle those loads. Ultimately, based upon those findings, analysis, planning staff is recommending approval subject to the conditions in the staff report, specifically condition number 3, which speaks to roadway improvements, that is tied back to the recommendation on page 6 of the staff report. However, it also leaves it open to the applicant having the option of providing another alternative for review by the city engineer. City planning staff and the city traffic engineer are on the meeting to answer questions that you may have. The applicant and the representatives are here to take your questions as well. I believe you also received a letter from the applicant in your packet, or it went out in the mail today. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Commission questions for Ms. Driver or staff? I guess I'll start with my first one. Ms. Driver, you referred to on page 6, the city engineering division recommendation about the 2-inch overlay on Northwest Stena and the 1-inch mill 3-inch overlay on Northwest 25th Street. Is the timing of that overlay now or at some point in the future life of that I guess Northwest Stena is 10 years old. I guess it would be, I could assume that it meant now, but just wanting to know the timing of those improvements prior to development.
The timing would be prior to the development of this property by this use, before they would be issued a certificate of occupancy.
All right, thank you. I guess just my own initial comments. I did review the traffic study. I do concur with its conclusions that the amount of traffic generated really has not a major impact on the level of service for that area. I also read the geotech report, and I think the conclusions about the heavy loaded vehicles damaging the pavement a little more severely than if it were just normal vehicles. That I think I can concur with the understanding of those heavy loaded concrete trucks and all the aggregate delivery vehicles having a higher impact on that pavement system than what a normal network might incur. Commission, any other questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kopp.
Ms. Driver, 2 questions. And I had a little bit of trouble hearing you earlier, so if you've answered this already, I apologize. But did I hear correctly that planning staff would be okay with a kind of an open-ended condition regarding the road improvements that if the planning commission approves the conditional use permit, that it would go back to the city engineer to consider any proposal from the applicant or some cost sharing or payment for undertaking the road improvements? Did I hear that correctly?
The intent of that condition is to be open-ended. It's to leave an option open to the applicant to propose a similar but substantially equivalent method to engineering for review.
And if I understand from the applicant, and I guess we'll hear from the applicant in a moment, they are not certain as to exactly what standard they're going to be held to. But I guess we'll hear from them. I'll ask them that question. My other question for you, Ms. Driver, relates to stormwater. Certainly the size of the facility that's going up there, and I don't know if they're going to be paving parking areas, driving areas, but it is going to increase the amount of impervious surface on that property, won't it?
Yes, it will. And they are going to be handling that through the 2 detention ponds which are on the site, as well as both the detention and the treatment will be reviewed at the time of site plan review application.
Right, and I noticed where the detention facilities, the detention ponds are in the south part of the property. Does the land break away from Soldier Creek at that point, that the water would flow to the south and away from Soldier Creek?
Yeah, actually, if you look at I don't know if you have the plans before you, but if you look at the landscape plan, it actually shows by directional arrows where it's draining to.
Okay. Does the city engineer look at the capacity of the detention ponds to identify whether that capacity would meet a rainfall event of a certain size?
They will be required to do such at the time of site plan review to look at those events.
So that'll occur on down the line if this is approved?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions at this point? With that, we would give the applicant an opportunity to address the commission. Is anyone with us from the applicant this evening? I can't see the total list of attendees at this point. Ms. Driver, do you see anyone on that would be?
Yes, they are. It looks like they're here at Henson Law Firm, but they're on mute for some reason. So I don't know.
Can you ask them then?
Hello, can you hear me? John Hutton.
Yep, gotcha.
Okay, the reason I'm on mute is because I think staff put me on mute, but glad to be here. My name is John Hutton. I'm a lawyer here in town. I represent Kansas Sand and Concrete. I am here today with Dan Woodward with Kansas Sand and Concrete. He's the general manager of that entity. I think you all can realize by virtue of the correspondence that I provided to staff, that I think was included in your staff report, that the real issue that we probably ought to talk about and spend time on is the roads, both Stena Court and 25th Street. I do appreciate the time and effort that staff has put into this project, especially Annie Driver. I know she's done a lot of work on it. And I think overall, it appears to be a good project that is going to be good for our community, as Kansas Sand is one of only 2 ready-mix providers in Shawnee County. I think it's important for this body to understand a little bit more about the economics of the situation than maybe just a pure review of the zoning issues. Kansas Sand intends to make an investment of well over $8 million, probably up to about $10 million for this project. That has a lot of ramifications. Both, first of all, it's expensive for the client for my client to make the investment. That goes without saying. But then also, that additional investment increases substantially the amount of property tax that my client will be paying once those improvements are added to the real property that they own. So the point being is that my client is intending to spend lots and lots of money on this project, and it's going to be a project that's going to serve my client probably for another 100 years, as they've been in this community already for 98 years. I think you can tell from my letter that there's really some concern as it relates, first of all, to Stena Court. You'll note that Stena Court is the cul-de-sac that runs north and south, right in the middle of the ADR Industrial Park. There are only two entities that would be using Stena Court. First of all, Hoyt's Truck Center, which is immediately to the west of Stena Court, and then of course Kansas Sand and Concrete, which if the CUP is approved, would construct its facility on the east side of Stena Court. I have mentioned in my papers that I provided a little bit about the history of Stena Court and the way in which it was constructed and the standards to which it was constructed. I have attached to my letter a section that was prepared by the city when this project was built several years ago. What is of note is the fact that initially the street section that was to be built was to be 9 inches of asphalt. You will note on the attachment to my letter that Mr. Jeff Hunt instructed Brian Marney that 8 inches of asphalt on 6 inches of AB3 would be acceptable. Okay, now of course keep in mind that at the time this was constructed, it was done knowing full well that it was going to be an industrial park, right? So one would think that people would understand that there would be perhaps a significant level of truck traffic of some kind that would be utilized on this road. So I guess that's why my client continues to be confused as to why it should be charged with adding additional asphalt to a road that is fully identified as something that will be serving only ADR Industrial Park, specifically only 2 entities, and to indicate that we need to add asphalt to this road when the city of Topeka, through Mr. Hunt, when it was initially constructed, determined that it only needed 8 inches of asphalt instead of 9. So, that's problematic from our standpoint, mainly because it doesn't seem equitable and it doesn't make a lot of sense, to be honest. Now let's talk a little bit about 25th Street, which runs east and west and forms the southern boundary of our property. Again, that roadway has been around for quite some time. I think you can look in the pavement analysis and see that it is about half concrete, half asphalt. Some areas it's about 12 inches thick, some areas it's about 14 inches thick. There were 2 core samples taken by Terracon in their assessment process. Again, this is an industrial road that is, like I've said before, less than a mile to the west of one of the largest industrial facilities in Northeast Kansas, being Goodyear Tire and Rubber. To the west of us, there's Hoyt's Truck Center that I've already mentioned. There's RDR Construction, there's BRB Construction, This is an industrial area and an industrial road. So again, my client is wondering why it would be charged with milling and overlaying a portion of 25th Street when that is going to be used by many, many industrial uses that are already there. In addition to obviously what my client would be bringing. So again, we get back to how equitable is that to have my client beef up a road that's really already pretty stout to be used by the whole community, including a large number of other industrial uses. I did do a little bit of math, and I want y'all to bear with me if you could on this, because at the end of the day, this is all about dollars and cents. We had a Zoom meeting last week with staff, both the planning department and public works staff, and discussed this a little bit. And I think at that point in time, I said, look, if we could all just establish that this was $1,000 to get this road work done, we wouldn't be having the discussion, we'd just do it. But I think we've all been around the block enough to know that this is going to cost significantly more than $1,000. Actually, I don't think anybody on this Zoom call right now knows exactly how much it'll cost, but it's going to be significant to overlay to mill and overlay several hundred yards of asphalt. My point is, at Kansas Sand's location right now, at 531 Tyler, where they've been for 98 years, they are paying, in 2020, they will pay $8,996 in property tax to the city of Topeka, okay? Went through the tax statements. It's fairly easy to do. You've all done it. You can determine exactly what portion of the property tax that's being paid is going to the particular entities. So let's just talk about the city of Topeka. Let's not talk about the county, the school district, any of the other entities. We're just talking about the city of Topeka. The status quo is my client is paying the city of Topeka $8,996.09 at its present location. When and if my client moves to this brand new location and makes the significant investment, it will be paying, if that's assuming that it's valued at somewhere around $9 million, which I think is pretty conservative, my client will be paying $42,861.96 to the city of Topeka per year in property tax. And you know what? That's fine. That's the way the system works. You make investment, you increase the value of real property. The real property is assessed differently by virtue of the increased value, and you pay more property tax. That's the rules of the game. That's the way everybody plays. We've all known that for many, many years. The difference is $33,865.87. Seems to me that would buy a lot of asphalt. Again, I don't know exactly how much the Public Works plan will cost, but the point is that we're already going to be paying a significant amount of money in additional tax, which again, I am not complaining about that. I am pointing that out because in essence, what the city is asking for here, or what staff is asking for, is for us to pay another tax simply because we've chosen to redevelop an industrial property that's been zoned I-2 for 50 plus years. So that's where my client's coming from. At the end of the day, it's a matter of equity. I mentioned in my letter some of the other industrial uses that are on board in Shawnee County, some of the larger plants that have been built. You're all aware of them. They've taken advantage of monies from the half-cent sales tax and through JADO. Again, as I said in my letter, that's fantastic. I think there's a real place for that in our community. Those are the rules of the game. If you want to bring in large industrial uses, you got to pay to play. I get that. But the point is, those entities come in, they're given land, they're given roadway, paid for with the half-cent sales tax. And then you've got people like Kansas Sand who've been providing and building this community for 100 years who don't want the JADO money. They don't want to do that. All they want to do is spend $9 or $10 million to build a brand new plant to continue to provide quality concrete to the community that they've served for almost 100 years. So again, another issue of equity that I think this body needs to understand and be cognizant of. So I could talk about this all night. I know none of us have time for that. So I'll kind of wrap it up. And I certainly want to answer any questions that you all might have. But again, our position at this point in time is to ask the Planning Commission to approve the conditional use permit that's been applied for. There are 3 conditions. Condition 1 and condition 2 are absolutely fine by my client, but we would ask that the CUP be approved with condition 1 and condition 2 and not condition 3. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Hutton?
I've got a question. Mr. Hutton, once this facility is up and running, would the current facility remain open or will it be closed down?
That's a good question. I think from a practical standpoint that it will remain open for a while. Obviously, they want to make sure that the new equipment and everything is up and running and tested and that they're able to provide, they have some assurances that they'll be able to provide for their customers. So there'll probably be a period of time where they're both open, but the long-term business plan obviously is to close the existing facility and sell it, sell the real property.
Okay, thank you.
But how that happens from a time standpoint, I'm afraid I can't tell you right now.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kopp.
Mr. Hutton, first of all, I want to say I think your client has picked a really good location. I mean, I think that's a great location for that use. And I think it's obviously put a lot of effort and, well, a lot of effort into the drawings. Everything looks good on paper, but I am very concerned about the position, as I understand it, that you have with the, that your client has with the street improvements. And if I'm understanding what you said correctly, your client's position is that there should be no contribution towards the cost of improving either of the streets. Is that it correct in a nutshell?
Well, Mr. Cow, that is correct in a nutshell. As I have explained to staff, my client is willing to discuss, for want of a better term, negotiate how this comes together. Because at the end of the day, it's really a financial contribution. And I fear that us and staff are talking past each other a little bit, because they are kind of approaching this from the standpoint of, well, you guys can come back and you can propose another way of mitigating the whatever stress is placed on the road by the truck traffic. I don't know that there's really another way to do it other than to put asphalt on the road. Okay, I mean, you know, I don't think it's cost effective for my client or anybody else to just tear out the road that's there and rebuild it. So obviously, I think the most cost effective thing eventually would be adding asphalt to the road or doing some milling and overlaying as has been proposed. So I don't know that there's really room for us to come back with another proposal that is somehow different from a construction standpoint to do what they're talking about. At the end of the day, it's money, okay? You know, would my client be willing to contribute some money to the process? I think they would. But again, I don't think anybody knows exactly how much these processes and this additional construction would cost. And again,
excuse me here, but let me ask you a question. Has your client come forward with a proposal of its own?
A proposal of its own to do, you mean in terms of how that should be constructed?
To contribute to the costs of the improvements on 25th Street and then Stena Court?
No, because we don't know how much we're talking about. We don't know what the dollars are.
What, can you tell me, I thought a moment ago you said that the length of the improvements to 25th Street, the overlay was a couple hundred yards. Is that right?
If I said a couple hundred, that was probably me just being tongue in cheek. I'm afraid we don't know exactly how long it would be or how far it would be. Maybe staff or Public Works has that number, but I think the idea would be to go west to Stover Road, which is the main north-south road that would service 25th Street.
Well, excuse me, but that's what I was looking for, the agenda materials. The improvement to 25th Street would be extending to the west and not to the east. Is that correct?
Again, you'd have to ask staff, but I assume so.
Okay. And I have to make the note that I'm very familiar with that stretch of road. I lived north of there for about 20 years until just very recently. And I have been on the stretch from Button Road over to Goodyear twice a day for 20 years. And seldom, very, very seldom would I see any Goodyear related traffic on that stretch of Highway 25th Street. So your own reports note that there is a shortened lifespan for those streets that were built at taxpayer expense. The heavy traffic you have, it's not a lot of vehicles. I appreciate that, but they're very, very heavy vehicles when they're loaded. There is no dispute that is causing, I'm going to say, unusual wear and tear on both 25th Street and Stena Court. Is there any dispute as to that?
Well, you used the term unusual. I guess I would not characterize it that way, especially given the fact.
Well, let me clarify that. I mean, the usual load would not shorten the estimated lifespan of the roadway. So unusual would mean that it's shortening the expected lifespan of the road due to either high volume or high or heavy loads during the scheduled lifespan or estimated lifespan of the road. That's what's unusual.
Right. But again, especially as it relates to Stena Court, the city made a decision when they built Stena Court that they were going to put less asphalt on it, and now they're asking us to pay for it. I mean, you know, I understand what you're talking about, and I understand where staff is coming from. We are concerned about what is being asked of us given the nature of this particular project. My client, when they bought these lots on the east side of Stena Court in an industrial park that has been designed, well, it's not designed, but approved by the city of Topeka, the idea was that, well, you know, there's utilities there, there's roadway there. We can jump in there and we can build a really nice facility, not having to spend money on public roadway.
Well, let me ask you this, Mr. Hutton. Can I ask you this, and then I'll turn it over?
Yes.
I'm assuming time is money, so I assume that your client wants this done sooner than later. But,
that's fair.
Okay, but would a continuation of this matter be acceptable so that you could sit and put pencil to paper with the city engineer and come up with a more, I understand that you're concerned about the uncertainty of the cost. That I think everyone would appreciate that. But at the same time, what is being proposed here is going to cause damage to a publicly owned roadway that would not be occurring but for the approval of this conditional use permit. So isn't there some way that your client can sit down with the city and have additional discussions and bring something back to us?
Well, I think that is possible. But like I said before, the dollars have to come to the fore and be discussed, because we're not going to be able to just come back and say, well, we want to do something different, or, we want to use concrete instead of asphalt or something like that, just because we don't know exactly how much money any of this is going to cost. So if I can get staff to talk to me in that language, and the language being dollars, possibly.
Well, what I have seen, and I don't think it's uncommon, is for a percentage of the estimated cost with a cap would be borne by the developer for infrastructure expenses like this. I don't think that's uncommon. It gives you certainty, and it gives some protection to the public for, the cost is going to be borne for those public roadways.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying. Yes, I agree.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Hutton.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hutton. Ms. Driver, is it my understanding that we do have city staff on with it also?
Yes, our city traffic engineer is here, if that's who you're asking for.
Yeah. I guess a question to Ms. Erickson then. It does seem that, I just off of Google Earth estimated about 600 feet of Northwest 25th Street. It would be possible to estimate what that mill and overlay that the city would be asking for as a potential cost estimate and provide that to the client. That would be something that could happen. Does that make sense?
It could. Those numbers that I would use to estimate are city costs. I'm not sure how that would translate to their cost if they to do the work themselves or hire it out.
Right.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Hutton. Can I make a comment to that?
Sure.
I guess what I foresee is if we do come to some sort of agreement, it would be a payment to the city, and then the city builds whatever they want to build according to their specs. I guess I don't foresee the need to have my client contract to build on the public right of way. If that makes sense.
Right. So noted. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, or we'll proceed to the public hearing? All right. With that, I will open the public hearing. Is there anyone on with us this evening that wishes to speak to this agenda item?
Yes, please. Mr. Chairman, my name is Nancy Fleeker Daniels. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And I'm representing my mother, Jane Fleeker, who owns the farm all along the west boundary and directly to the north. And we've already had one, I attended the public meeting with Ms. Driver and the applicant, and we worked out several things that my mother was concerned about. But the one thing is that we do want assurance that there is going to be sufficient drainage that will not end up putting stuff on my mother's farmland that's not currently there. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure that nothing is draining from the plant onto my mother's farmland. And they did talk to me and explain to me about the ponds and everything. But also Ms. Driver, I believe, if I'm quoting her correctly, she said that the city engineer staff would look at that and that they would approve it before anything was finalized. So I just want assurance that there won't be any drainage onto her farmland. And then a second thing, now that you're talking about the road improvements, I just want to know if it turns out that there's so much heavy traffic and the road has to be improved, my mom's not going to have to pay for that, is she? And those were the two questions I had.
All right, thank you. Ms. Driver, any response from staff?
Yes, from my knowledge is, yes, those stormwater plans will be reviewed by our stormwater engineer. And to my knowledge, it's no net increase can go on her property. And it will also have to address treatment of the water as well as the runoff. And their initial concept has been reviewed by our city stormwater engineer, and the plans, though, will have to be further reviewed before they would be getting a building permit.
Okay, thank you. And then so far as if the street has to be repaired, that would not be any cost to her?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to answer that question. So as proposed, there's no proposal that there be a cost sharing by other property owners in the area. If there was a benefit district proposed, that might be up in the air. That question might be open at this time, but that's not what's proposed. That hasn't even been discussed as an opportunity. So under what's proposed, no neighbors will be responsible for contributing to improvements to the roadway.
Okay, thank you. I hadn't even thought about that until I listened to the conversation this evening. So I just wanted to check it out. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else with us this evening to speak to this item? All right, with that, I will close the public hearing. Commission, additional discussion?
I might make a comment. I've been looking at the Earth image of this. One thing I'm noting is that, it seems like it's a good location for this, being that a lot of new concrete is not going to happen right inside downtown Topeka necessarily, it seems like. And being close to 75 highway and 24, it's pretty close to major intersections. And then I look at where the plant's at now, and it's basically in downtown next to, or not downtown, next to Topeka Boulevard Bridge. And my thinking is, just thinking out loud, that it would actually be a benefit to the city for them not to be where they're at now, because where they're currently at to get outside the city, outskirts where a lot of construction happens, would be using more city streets than they would if they were to move. So it's just kind of a random comment, I guess, more than anything, that and maybe there's a benefit for them to move, and in terms of not hurting current city streets closer to where they're at now. But I'll just throw that out there as a comment. So.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kopp.
I reckon I may be all by myself on this one, but I do think that the issue of contributing towards the cost of the roadway is significant. As I said before, I think the land use itself, that location, makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure it's a great company. I have no issue about that, and they're providing a needed product, no question about that. But there is an obligation to protect public property as land is developed. And I'm going to offer a motion, if you would allow a motion, that may die right away, to continue this matter to the next meeting with the instructions request that the applicant and city staff sit down and see if they can hammer out some certainty as to the dollar amount of the improvements that they're going to have that the applicant would be paying for.
Mr. Chair, this is Katrina Ringler. I was just going to say I'm in support of that motion if it was made, but I think my feeling is that the improvements to Stina are probably not as important as the ones to 25th Street, just because it's newly built. And I understand Mr. Hutton's concern that it was built to city specifications at that time. Looking at some of the other industry that's up in that area, I mean, there is on Button Road some other pretty, I mean, there's a bus service, there's other contractors in the area that maybe some additional, like you were saying, somebody was saying maybe some cost share opportunities would be available. But I think that deserves a little bit more conversation with the city. But I think if we focused on 25th Street, that would be sufficient.
I believe Mr. Kopp maybe made the motion, but I'll just maybe add on to that comment, though. I mean, although Stina Court is 10 years old and constructed to a city local street typical section, I do think that this land use and heavy truck traffic will have more of an adverse impact on even that newer roadway than any normal development in that area would. So I do know that 500 feet along Northwest 25th Street would be critical, but I do still see the additional impact on Northwest Stina in addition, just based on the truck traffic and projected use of what that looks like, and as noted in the geotech report from Terracon. Mr. Kopp, was that a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, it would, and I will thank the Commissioner for the second, but as you just said, I agree with you that that Stina Court, I would anticipate, given its current construction, that it would show wear and tear sooner than 25th Street would. And then the folks, adjoining property owners, whoever at some point in time in the future are going to come back to the city and request reconstruction of that property, and maybe at city at large expense, who knows? So they may create a benefit district that would take in the farmland as well, anybody that benefits from the improvement. So I would like to keep both streets in the mix for purposes of discussion between the applicant and city engineering.
And Mr. Chair, I totally am I guess in support of your guys, especially your expertise on that. I just wanted to mention kind of my thoughts as we were talking. I wasn't necessarily seconding the motion at this point, so.
This is Commissioner Lawson, and I think it's a significant issue, and I would second the motion.
The motion from Commissioner Kopp to continue this for further discussions between the city and the applicant, and a second by Ms. Lawson. Any further discussion?
Oh, come on. Call the
All
roll.
right.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, if you would allow before there's a vote, I'm not asking the applicant to embrace the idea of a continuance, but I would like, personally, I would like to know that that doesn't create an impossible situation for them.
Dan, are we okay on that? Is that are you, Mr. Chairman, is that question directed at me?
I believe it was, Mr. Hutt.
All right, very good. Short answer to your question is no. I think we can work with that, Mr. Cal. Thank you for the consideration.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Motion and a second. Let's move forward. Chris, will you please take the roll?
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Kanar,
Aye.
Mr. Kaup,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
and Ms. Ringler.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0 with none abstaining.
Okay.
All right, we will. My notes in order. We'll move on to item D4.
You're free to go, sir.
And I do still hear some background noise. Maybe everyone could make sure they're muted. Item D4, ACZR 20/01, a request to amend the Topeka Municipal Code, Title 18, Comprehensive Plan, Sign, Subdivision Zoning as follows. Amendments to the definitions in Chapter 18.55, use tables in Chapter 18.60, and special use requirements in Chapter 18.225 to regulate short-term residential rental. Uses currently referred to as bed and breakfast home and bed and breakfast inn by TMC Title 18. Amendments to other chapters of TMC Title 18 may also be considered as needed to regulate short-term residential rentals, which are generally owner-occupied or non-owner-occupied dwellings that offer lodging to transient guests. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, this item is an amendment to the zoning regulations for short-term rentals. We're currently termed bed and breakfast homes and bed and breakfast inns in our code. Before I get started with the slides, I want to go back to some written comments we received. This title is not actually correct. Some of these comments we received before the packet was sent out to you, and those are in the packet. But we did receive some, and we emailed those to you this afternoon. And it's the awkwardness of a Zoom meeting that we can't hand you a piece of paper and have it in front of you for the meeting. So these comments are very worthwhile, I think, for you to read. And you can certainly refer to them during the slides if you wish, or if you take time after that as well. And I can summarize them a bit at the end, and I will if necessary. But anyway, I just wanted to direct your attention to that. So, why are we proposing to change the regulations to short-term rentals now? The current code is overdue for an update. It does not reflect what is currently happening with the sharing economy and the proliferation of online platforms such as Airbnb and Vrbo. We know of at least 32 short-term rental properties, although there have been relatively few complaints about them. There was a triggering event for us to do this, and this happened about 1 year ago. The department received complaints about a growing concentration of short-term rentals in the Auburndale neighborhood. Enforcement led to the owner of one of them to appeal to the Board of Zoning Appeals. The BZA denied the appeal, but the public hearing revealed there are many bed and breakfast homes in Topeka, and none have been approved by a conditional use permit, although that was a requirement for most of them. Following the hearing and the decision by the BZA, a subsequent decision was made to hold off requiring owners of these uses to obtain conditional use permits pending an amendment to the zoning code to address these issues. So this slide shows you the process that we've undertaken. There's been a lot of stakeholder engagement, and it's been very helpful. We had 2 October stakeholder meetings, and then we had the discussion by the Planning Commission on the 19th, and a lot of those people that attended those stakeholder meetings also attended that discussion meeting. And here we are today asking for a recommendation and asking to hold a public hearing. One thing I can say with all sincerity is the steps that were taken to engage stakeholders, both the owner operators and the neighboring property owners, really have yielded some helpful questions and observations and some suggestions. They've all been considered and, where appropriate, addressed by changes to the proposed regulations. We feel, staff feels, that the recommended ordinance balances the needs of the owners, neighborhood residents, and the community as a whole. And a lot of this stakeholder engagement wasn't just limited to those meetings we had. We've had by phone, by email. We have had many conversations with folks, both owners and resident or property owners adjacent to owners. There's a lot of reference to residential zoning districts, and for the sake of people that are maybe listening into this meeting, the primary concern about short-term rentals is how they are regulated in residential zoning districts. Most of the properties identified in the study of short-term rentals, which is attached to your packet, are in single-family residential districts. This slide is an example of how these districts appear on a zoning map typically. And as you can see, typically an entire block will have the same zoning. It's unusual to have small parcels of different zoning surrounded by other zoning. What is a single-family dwelling as the zoning code defines it? A single-family dwelling is a building occupied by a single family. But family, as defined in the zoning code, is an individual or 2 or more persons related by blood, marriage, or legal adoption, or a group of not more than 5 persons not related by blood or marriage living together as a single housekeeping unit. It's important to note that a single-family dwelling is allowed in single-family residential districts, allows up to 5 unrelated individuals as a single-family residence, and such households are allowed in single-family residential zoning districts. That provides some backdrop to some of the standards that have been drafted. Also, it's important to point out for people who don't know, is a single-family dwelling may be occupied by the owner or tenants renting from the owner. There's no restriction on people renting out their homes. So also attached to your packet is a report on the research that staff has done. And we collected this information in March of this year. It was collected for a point in time, travel dates for November 6th to the 13th, 2020. So wherever sites were listed on these platforms at that time, those are the ones we know about. There are others out there. We collected them for this point in time, and these are the ones we know about. We found a total of 32 properties in city limits, and 25 of these are non-owner occupied. So this slide here shows how the short-term rental properties are distributed in Topeka zoning districts. 18 of the 32 short-term rentals identified in the report are located in single-family residential zoning districts. Staff also conducted a lot of research on how STRs are regulated in other cities. In Lawrence, owner-occupied short-term rentals are allowed with a license. And this, I'm referring specifically to single-family and two-family residential districts. In those districts in Lawrence, non-owner-occupied short-term rentals are prohibited. And that's a recent change. Non-owner-occupied short-term rentals used to be allowed, but they actually changed that recently, just within the past 3 to 6 months. Lawrence requires initial inspection and inspection for renewal every 2 years. And they also require licensing for long-term rentals. In Manhattan does not have regulations specifically pertaining to short-term rentals, but they do require licensing for long-term rentals. In Overland Park, owner-occupied and non-owner-occupied rentals are allowed by administrative permit, but that applies to both short-term and long-term rental. They don't make the distinction. They don't specifically regulate short-term rentals. But they do require initial inspection for renewal every 2 years. Kansas City, Kansas, for short-term rentals, they require a special use permit. A special use permit is very comparable to what a conditional use permit is in the city of Topeka, in that it requires a public hearing by the Planning Commission and an action by the governing body. And they do inspections every 2 years. I'm going to skip this slide because this slide pretty much explains it. So this is the land use table in the zoning code, just that part that pertains to the residential districts. And the way the land use table works is that it lists all the uses, all the potential uses that we know of. And what I have here are the uses: bed and breakfast home, bed and breakfast inn. What's being proposed is that be eliminated and replaced with short-term residential rental type 1, short-term residential rental type 2, and short-term residential rental type 3. If I can just focus your attention on the first column after, it'd be the second column actually, for the R1, R2, and R3 districts. As you can see, the bed and breakfast home, bed and breakfast inn, currently it requires a conditional use permit. As proposed, it would be allowed by administrative permit for short-term rentals type 1 and 2. And if the specific use standards cannot be met, the owner has the option of applying for a conditional use permit. As you can see the same applies in the zoning for duplexes, for two-family dwellings. Okay. So let me cover the administrative permit. The administrative permit requirement, as proposed, would apply to short-term residential rental types 1 and 2, where indicated by an S/C in the land use table. Application submittal requirements and fee is determined by the department director. Upon approval of an administrative permit, the department will notify owners of adjacent properties. The permit would be valid for 2 years, but the permit holder may apply for renewal after 2 years. The department may deny an application, revoke it, or suspend a permit for failure to comply with the use standards. An owner-operator that does not meet the specific use standards may apply for a conditional use permit, where a short-term rental is designated as an S/C in the land use table. So some more comparisons. Under the current standards for bed and breakfast homes and bed and breakfast inns, which is comparable to the short-term rentals types 1 and 2, the building must retain its appearance as a single-family residence, giving no appearance of a business use. Bed and breakfast homes may not be used for weddings, receptions, and similar events. Bed and breakfast inns may be used for such events, but with many restrictions. This doesn't really change with the proposed standards. More comparisons. So specific use standards for bed and breakfast homes and inns. As it relates to concentration and spacing of these, there's no express requirement, but spacing could be an issue and could be addressed as part of a conditional use permit under the current standards. As proposed, there's no requirement for short-term rental type 1, but there is for short-term rental type 2. Remember that a short-term rental type 1 is a short-term rental that is owner-occupied. Short-term rental type 2 is a short-term rental that's not owner-occupied. So as proposed, any short-term rental type 2 in an R, M1, or M1A district established after March 1st, 2021 shall be no closer than 500 feet from another short-term rental type 2 or 3 in a R, M1, or M1A district. And this is a slight change from the October 19th draft that we presented to you at that time. Another comparison, parking. Under the current code, there's no stated off-street parking requirement for bed and breakfast homes, for events and bed and breakfast inns. A plan of operation, including arrangement for parking, is required. As proposed, for short-term rental type 1, one off-street parking space for primary resident and one off-street parking space for every 2 guest bedrooms. Up to 3 spaces may be provided on street with a minimum of 22 feet of unobstructed frontage for each on-street parking space. And this is a modification from the October 19th draft. For short-term rental type 2, it's the same as for a single-family dwelling, 1 to 2 spaces depending on the size of the dwelling. But up to 2 spaces may be provided on-street with a minimum of 22 feet of unobstructed frontage for each on-street parking space. This has also been changed. Okay, for short-term rental type 3. So when people typically think of a bed and breakfast inn, you think of a large facility typically. In the case of what's being proposed, it's 6 or more guest rooms is in this category of short-term rental type 3. So as proposed, one off-street parking, or excuse me, under the current standards, it's one off-street parking space per sleeping room. As proposed, it would be one off-street parking space for the primary resident and a minimum of 1 space for every 2 guest bedrooms or fraction thereof. Up to 3 on-street parking spaces may substitute for required off-street parking with a minimum of 22 feet of unobstructed frontage for each on-street parking space. Again, this has been revised from the earlier draft. I have a couple slides here to demonstrate how the parking works. So the first slide shows a case where there's very minimal off-street parking or on-street parking. So in this case, this property, what this aerial would indicate is that there are 2 potential parking spaces off-street that would be accessed off of an alley, and that there would be 1 space on the street because there's 37 feet of frontage. So potentially there are 3 parking spaces for this unit. This is a scenario that's really at the other end of the spectrum where this property has a lot of parking options. So this property has a long driveway and they have a garage. So in this situation, there are more than 4 potential parking spaces off-street. And there's a lot of frontage, so there's a lot of potential for on-street parking. One thing I want to mention about on-street parking is substituting for off-street. That's very unusual in zoning codes from, in my understanding, and it certainly does not apply currently in any expressed way in the code at this time. So it's kind of a new idea. So other standards added since the October 19th draft. So one thing we did is we listened to some of the comments we received, but we also did a little bit more research. So we did receive a comment about commercial vehicles. So under the proposed draft, it would prohibit parking of commercial vehicles by transient guests. And I referenced the definition for commercial vehicle because it's a fairly specific definition. It doesn't mean that any vehicle used for commercial purposes is commercial. It has to have be of a certain size and be of a certain nature. Also, control of noise. Outdoor activities producing noise would be prohibited between the hours of 11 p.m. and 7 a.m. A requirement that trash and recycling receptacles be of sufficient size and number to accommodate all refuse generated by the guests. Text changes to avoid rendering existing Type 3 short-term rentals non-conforming uses. The Type 3 short-term rentals that we know about have operated in Topeka with no known negative impacts in multifamily residential districts. There are quite a few of these in a certain part of central Topeka, and they're operating fine. We didn't want to create a situation where suddenly they were non-conforming. So that concludes staff's presentation of the slides. One thing I want to mention about some of the comments we received, especially one today, comment we received from someone who was concerned about how the new parking standards would affect her short-term rental. Essentially, they would create a situation for her that would require her to apply for a conditional use permit. And so what she's recommending, and this is a letter that we received from Susie Loy, what she's recommending is that the fact that her residential property had no parking before she converted it to a owner-occupied short-term rental should be recognized as a legal non-conforming right. And so we thought about that. I think that there's a way to work with that. There's a way to make some revisions to what we've drafted to address that. One of the other more recent comments we got was opposed to short-term rentals. And another recent comment has some concerns, but felt comforted by the fact that we've made revisions to address some of her concerns. And that letter is attached, or not attached to the packet, but it's something that you received today. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Questions from the commission?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Kaup.
I've been talking a lot tonight, so I appreciate your willingness to call on me, okay? Thank you. Mr. Hall, just a couple real quick questions. On page 15 of the regulations, proposed regulations, at line 342, 343, are you there?
Yes.
It's
yes.
a definition, a new definition for transient guest, and it says a person who occupies a residential rental for a period of less than 28 days. Is that intended to mean 28 consecutive days, 28 days in a calendar year, 28 days in a 12-month period? I think it needs some clarification. As drafted, I could be there 28 days, leave one day, come back for 28 days.
It's intent, Commissioner Kaup, it's intended to mean consecutive days. The idea being that it's possible to rent a unit on consider a long-term rental on a month-to-month basis. And so that 28 days is intended to represent the shortest month of the year. That 28 number is also consistent with how the state of Kansas regulates short-term rentals in terms of tax collection.
Okay, but it still means, even if you plug in consecutive days, it means I can be there 28 days, leave for one day, and then start another 28-day term. Is that acceptable?
Well, if you left for less than 28 days and you came back, it would still be a short-term rental. So yes, that would be acceptable.
Okay, if that's the intent. My big question is, for each of these categories, there's a provision in the proposed regulations that prohibits any new construction being used for this purpose? And what's the policy reason for that?
That's a very good question. That was in the existing code. I can only speculate that the idea is that this is intended to be kind of a grassroots thing, people taking existing homes and fixing them up. So I guess if there is a public purpose that might not be entirely clear, that you could identify, and something that's been pointed out from our stakeholder discussions is that one of the positive outcomes of allowing short-term rentals is that people do fix up existing homes. But at the same time, the idea is not that in a new subdivision, someone would build a home specifically for a short-term rental.
Well, I appreciate it. It would probably be a rare instance when somebody would build a house and right from the beginning want to use it for one of these categories. But I guess my point is, why do we want to regulate that? Why do we want to prohibit that?
I think it's a fair question. I suppose if we think about how the implications of this, if someone was in say a central Topeka neighborhood and they wanted to build a home for the purpose of using it as a short-term rental, first of all, how would we know that that was their intended purpose? And what would be the downside of that? I think that I don't know how important that is to the overall code. It was something that was already in there. And so we didn't really, I'm going to be honest, we didn't really think about the implications of it that much.
Well, just speaking for myself, it seemed like it's an unnecessary regulation, unnecessary prohibition. The last thing I want to mention to you, Mr. Hall, was you take a look at page 42, and this shows up several places. It's the, you referenced before about the noise issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know where this phrase came from, but activities producing noise with the potential to disturb adjacent residents. Good luck in enforcing that. That is vague about a half dozen different ways. I hope you're not going to tell me that that's already in the city code terminology that way, because it's very, very vague. So.
May I make a couple of comments on his two last points, which I think were very good?
I will open the public hearing in just a minute. We're still entertaining comments for staff.
You know, I think I'd like to respond to Mr. Karp's comments about that noise. I think that that's a challenge. Obviously, that is pretty vague. I think that what's difficult is identifying what all potential sources of noise. The city has a noise ordinance, but it's pretty narrowly written. It's hard to say that someone would just follow the noise ordinance. So I think you could wordsmith that a bit to make it more specific, and we can give that some more thought. But I suppose staff struggled with that a bit and how to write that. We didn't want to be so specific we excluded other sources of noise.
Well, Mr. Hall, I know it's a burden and it sounds like it's an overkill, but the only noise regulations that I know that have some guarantee of success are ones that carry with it a decibel level. And that means the cops show up with a meter, you know, or code enforcement show up with a meter, and that's tough. And maybe it's unlikely, but that's the kind of standard that you have that provides some certainty.
And that's a good point. We actually have used decibel levels as conditions of approval for certain types of projects, you know, projects that produce noise. So that's I think there's some potential there. I'm not sure what that decibel level would be, thinking on the fly, but there's probably a way you can do that.
Okay,
Commissioners, Mr. Kopp, final comment, please.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead if you have a final comment before
No,
we
that's all,
move
Mr.
to the
Chairman.
public
Thank you.
hearing.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other comments, or we'll move to the public hearing? All right, with that, we will open the public hearing. I think we have, I think from my screen, several on to address this item. I can't tell order or, but anyone speak up. We'll give you 4 minutes to address the commission and answer questions.
I'm Brandy, and I was just wanting to reply to Mr. Kopp real quick while we're still on those two subjects. I think that as hosts, it is our job to make sure that the surrounding neighbors around us are at ease, and by putting rules into our bookings as far as, you know, stating your house rules, like no extra guests live in the stay overnight in the property after 10 p.m. Like, that's a rule we use that works really well and has prevented us for having problems with parties. There is also a decibel machine that you can buy, and it will alert you if you don't live at that home, and it will alert you if a decibel level goes above a certain amount, so you can stop anything that may start to happen. On weekends, we also have a 2-night minimum, so people can't book a 1-night stay, and that's usually it's people that live in that hometown and want 1 night on a weekend that would be the type to throw parties. So for that reason, we don't allow people that live in Topeka to book unless they have a good reason, like a pipe breaks and it's for more than 1 day. And I also agree with Mr. Kopp about his comment about new construction, because say, for instance, I would say, like, if you own, 40 acres and you build a cabin at your land and just find that you don't go there, stay in it that often, I don't see why, just because it would be newly constructed, why that would be a problem using it as a short-term rental, unless you do.
All right, thank you, Brandy.
I have a question.
Mr. Armstrong?
Chris, Ms. Wagers.
If Brandy said her last name, I didn't catch it. For the record, could I get that?
It is Brandy Holloway.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Question.
All right, I saw Pam raise her hand. Pam, could you state your first and last name and then address the commission, please?
Yes. Pam Foster. And first, I would just like to start by thanking proprietors like Brandy that are conscientious, and unfortunately, not everybody is. And so I appreciate the commission's work on this ordinance. What I want to do is clarify the answer to Mr. Kalp's question, because I'm still a little bit confused. So he said, if you stay for 28 days, you leave on day 29, and you come back on what would be day 30, you can stay for another 28 days. And you said yes. So you could potentially be there for 12 months with just an intermittent day every 28 days that you stay in a motel. Is that correct?
Mr. Hall?
Well, the intent is that someone who's staying for more than 28 days is a long-term renter. It's not a short-term renter. We never really, actually, I did not anticipate this question. It's a very good question. I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around it a little bit, but typically if someone stays somewhere for 28 days, leaves for a day and come back, it's more like a long-term rental. It's not even really the same thing.
Right, but my understanding from Mr. Kalp is the way that it's written, that would be allowed in this ordinance. Anyway, I was just curious because the answer didn't seem to clarify his question, and so I was a little confused in terms of what that meant exactly.
I think, so if something is a long-term rental, it's not regulated in the same way. It's just an allowed use. It's just, it's allowed anyway. And if somebody does do that, then they're really complying with the spirit of the law. So I think, again, I did not anticipate that question. It's a good question. I think it would be an unusual occurrence if it happened. And if someone did stay in a place for, say, 25 days or 20 days and came back and stayed in that same place on a separate occasion, and that's separated by a certain amount of time, then it is more like a short-term rental because there's the transient nature of it.
Yeah, well, like Mr. Kalp said, you may want to just look at that and clarify. And if the period of time's a week or whatever, I don't know what the answer to it is, but was just curious because the question didn't seem, or the answer didn't seem to quite answer his question. And so anyway, that's all I have.
Right.
All right, thanks. Mr. Hall, just to clarify, I can't see what the concern is with that issue. Is there one that I'm missing?
Mr. Chair, this is Mary. Can I maybe able to clarify?
Please.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Transient guest is tied to the definition of a short-term residential rental, which is a dwelling that contains rooms that's kept for transient guests. So it's not like we're going to count how many days a person stays at a bed and breakfast to see whether they comply with the ordinance. You have to take it into context with the definition of what a short-term residential rental is. It's for transient guests. And that definition is consistent with the transient guest tax in state law, which defines hotels and motels in terms of whether they provide lodging to a transient guest, which is somebody who stays for less than 28 days. So I think this is much ado about nothing.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak to the commission this evening? Susie Loy, I see your hand up. You may state your first and last name and address the commission.
Susie Loy, and I'm an operator of a Type 1 Airbnb. I have 3 bedrooms in my home upstairs and a shared bath, and I've been renting for 2.5 years. The only issue I have is the parking issue, and I've talked to the planning staff about my particular issue where I have absolutely no parking on my property. There's only street parking. I'm fortunate in that across the street, there's only 2 houses in the whole block, and those homes have big driveways to the back of their homes. So the whole across the street is not used by residents. And so I've submitted some language that I hope you'll give strong consideration to, because if you don't, I would be forced to look at a conditional use permit, and even that has the parking specifications that I might not qualify for. I've invested a lot of time and money, and I feel like I operate a really good business and give people a comfortable place to stay, and I would hate to be denied that because I have an old home. Thank you for hearing me out.
All right, thank you. Anyone else with us this evening to address the commission? last call. I think I see a couple other names on. Anyone else on tonight that wishes to address the commission? All right, with that, we will close the public hearing. Further discussion from commissioners and staff?
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Ringler. Can I ask staff to address Ms. Loy's proposed wording changes and let us know if that's a potential change that we could act on, or is that something that they think could be fixed in another way?
Yeah, Chairman Ringler, I think there's a way that we can revise the standards to address her concern. Under the way it's written right now, she would have to apply for a conditional use permit if she was to continue, because she would not have enough parking for any guests to meet the standard. So I think there's a way to write it in a way that recognizes an existing home that has a right as a legal non-conforming use to not having any off-street parking. Just to be clear, so under her situation, she has an alley behind her property. There's no practical way to provide off-street parking from that alley because there's a substantial grade difference between the alley and her rear yard, and there's a retaining wall. So it'd be pretty close to impossible within reason to provide off-street parking. So if you made the change that she's recommending, what that would do is grandfather her, for lack of a better word, for the parking that's required for a resident. It wouldn't grandfather her for the parking that's required for a guest. She has frontage enough for one parking space. So what that means is if that change was made, that she'd be allowed to continue, but she would only be able to rent out 2 sleeping rooms. Just so she understands that.
Any other comments, commissioners? If not, I would entertain a motion this evening.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just curious, what page is the staff recommendation on? I think I might be a little hazy. Are we looking to approve it based on how it's written right now? Because I know several concerns were brought up for potential revisions.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to answer that question?
Please. My screen is in the middle of the large draft document right now.
Okay. So, Commissioner, there's the memorandum it's a cover memo for the packet for this item in the packet. On the first page, in the first paragraph, we're recommending approval, and there's a recommended motion in that second paragraph. But we also recognize that you might want to request revisions. So if you want to recommend approval as drafted, you can, but certainly you could recommend approval with revisions. And I think some of the issues raised by Commissioner Kaup, I think we can address those with revisions. Some more thought probably needs to go into how to deal with the noise issue. You could probably wordsmith that a bit if you want and address that issue. If there's a desire to come up with a decibel standard, I'm not sure what that would be without doing a little more research. Usually if there's a decibel standard, it's decibels at the property line. So there's a way to do that. But I just don't know what those, I don't have a good frame of reference in my head right now. We've done that, it can be done, but we'd have to, I think we'd have to research a bit more to come up with a proper decibel level. Unless you wanted to, you could make the motion and you could, instead of coming up with a decibel level in your motion, you could say decibel level equivalent to whatever you think that should be. And we could do it that way. So there's probably a way to address it without actually having a specific decibel level tonight.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kaup.
I feel like I'm suggesting kicking the can down the road, but unless there's some urgency for getting this in front of the city council, and if there is, I would hope someone would tell me that. But if not, we could again continue the matter and see if staff can come back with other language relating to the noise issue. I respectfully disagree with Mary Feeney on the significance of the 28-day issue, but I'd like to ask staff to take another look at that. And then the issue of the necessity or the public policy behind prohibiting new construction from being used as a short-term rental. Those are my three issues. But again, I don't know if anybody else shares those concerns.
So I guess before we move forward with that, Mr. Hall, timing on presenting to the governing body and sensitivity to that deadline?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a question for Mr. Fyander.
Sure. I'll chime in here, Mr. Chair. The urgency only exists in the sense that we have put off enforcement to come up with this proposed ordinance over the last 6 to 9 months. I think if it takes another meeting to come back with a more coherent proposal that addresses your questions, I don't see a problem with that. So we do have, I just want to remind folks, we do have an enforcement issue that we have stayed for the past half-plus year. We do have that situation out there. So we do have some urgency, but we certainly can use our time well and come back to you if that's what the commission wants.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Kaup.
Bill, if I could respond to it, I want you to know that I think it's a really good piece of work and it's a great improvement over what's on the books right now. These are just minor things that relatively minor things that I think could surface in the future. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have the record show that in addition to the concerns that I have, if a motion for continuance is made, I also think that the concerns raised by Ms. Loy ought to be looked at. I think staff said that thought they could work that issue out, and if that requires another tweak to the regulations, I would hope they would take a look at that. I think she made some important points, I thought. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if you're looking for a motion, I would offer a motion to continue this matter to the January meeting.
Or later date. I would second.
Motion and a second. Further discussion? All right, with that, Chris, please take the roll.
Mr. Armstrong,
Aye.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Canar,
Aye.
Mr. Kelp,
Aye.
Ms. Lawson,
Aye.
Ms. Messina,
Aye.
and Ms. Ringler.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0 with none abstaining.
On to item E, communications to the commission. Mr. Finder?
Mr. Chair, I don't have any specific communications other than to wish everybody a amazing holiday and holidays and Happy New Year's. We will see you next year. And I just also want to thank you for your diligence in getting through this year, your acceptance of some new methods and new ways of doing things, and to know that we are always listening and want to get better. So thank you for your indulgence and supporting how to make us a better process and us better for it. So thank you.
Thanks. I have those same comments. Everyone, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. I do think the Zoom has a little flexibility. It's taught us to do things a little differently, but glad we can still continue this year and be of service to the city. So thanks, everyone. With that, we are adjourned.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Holidays.